Has DNA testing confirmed some accounts in the Book of Mormon? The amazing findings by L.A. Marzulli coming up next on Deceptions of the Ages News. Hello everybody and welcome to Deceptions of the Ages News. Today we have a really exciting show and I just want to say thank you to everybody who has been subscribing. We've got almost 1,000 subscribers, so we're getting close to that 1,000,000 subscriber mark. So thanks again for subscribing. If you like this kind of stuff, if you like the historical context, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you always get the notifications when my videos come out. Okay, so let's talk about the exciting new developments that are coming out of Peru. L.A. Marzulli goes to Peru to investigate these elongated skulls. And the more he looks at these skulls, the more interesting things he finds. One of the things that he finds is that according to common belief, these skulls are made by deforming children's heads. But by looking at babies' heads, they realize kids are born this way. And that according to Marzulli, this is a DNA preference that these people have been selected out for these elongated skulls. Now, if you don't know too much about the Book of Mormon, I will just give you a really quick rundown. In the Book of Mormon, a family leaves from Israel, and they are leaving because the Assyrians are getting ready to invade, and it's about 600 BC. So they get in boats. They actually travel down south, probably to the coast of Oman. They build ships, they get in these boats, and they take off for the New World. Now, in the New World, they multiply, they prosper, they start to hate each other, and they start to have all these racial wars, right? Sound familiar? Well, while this stuff is happening, they happen to run into the remnants of a civilization that lived before. And this civilization has a historical account of their existence, and they existed in my book, Deceptions of the Ages, Mormons, Freemasons, Extraterrestrials. I counted them to be about a 3,000-year-old civilization based on the lineage of their kings. So in this book called the Book of Jared, a family leaves at the time of the Tower of Babel. They leave the Middle East and they get in boats. They travel. Here actually is the account. I'll just show you right here. Here's the account from the Book of Jared. And this account, it talks about they left the Tower of Babel and they traveled south through the wilderness, which was probably the empty quarter of Saudi Arabia, and made their way down to the coast, either to near what is modern-day Salalah or maybe Sur in the Sultanate of Oman. But these people built ships, and they also went to Latin or Central America. So in Central America, they flourished and they lived there for a long time, so they actually were able to expand. But what happened to them is they just devolved into secret societies and the hatred, and some of the accounts of their battles talk about millions of people dying in a single battle. And when the civilization is discovered by the Nephites, who came from Israel later, they talk about seeing millions and millions of bones scattered across the land. So a very powerful civilization that ended up wiping itself out because of hatred and mistrust. Now, let's flash forward to about 1820. An obscure day laborer comes out with this book. It's called the Book of Mormon. And the day laborer, his name is Joseph Smith, and him and another fellow named Oliver Cowdery claimed to have translated these golden plates given to them by an angel And a lot of people, for various or obvious reasons, discounted this and still do today. Discounted this, his whole account and the Book of Mormon, and still that happens today. And I talk about that in great depth, and it is actually the reason for me writing Deceptions of the Ages, Mormons, Freemasons, and Extraterrestrials. Now, other reason for writing Deceptions of the Ages is that Deceptions of the Ages is about the conflict between religion and science. So we have to go into the Templars and all that to talk about the conflict between like the Catholic Church and the scientific movement in Europe. But the book also talks about how things that are associated with the Latter-day Saints are automatically just poo-pooed as nothing, and people are laughed about as if they are followers of UFOs or whatever. So this is just another area where when this book came out about some people that came from Israel, and then they came to America and they built a crazy civilization in Central America. And now this is in 1820 when none of this stuff had actually been seen. They hadn't discovered any of these Mayan pyramids or anything, and so they didn't really know. So it just sounded like, oh, this is a crazy account. So the point of Deceptions of the Ages is that through science, we continually find that science proves all these things that the Book of Mormon has claimed all along. Okay, now let's talk about what L.A. Marzulli has done in Peru with these skulls, these elongated skulls. Now, I saw this first on Blake Cousins' Third Phase of Moon, so I will leave the description down at the bottom. And the first thing that I had to laugh about was that in L.A. Marzulli, when he's talking about the civilization that came from where they came from, the Levant, they came from Israel. Now, in his account, L.A. Marzulli talks about the Israelites are the one committing a warfare. And I don't know, I wasn't there at the time, but according to the Jaredite account, it comes from the Tower of Babel, all right? But the time periods, and I also am going to borrow a little bit from the Nephi Project and George Potter, which I'll also put a link in the description below along with Blake Cousins' video. Now, I also want to just jump into Deceptions of the Ages for a little bit because, of course, not being LDS, L.A. Marzulli is not going to understand this. But the idea of Jesus Christ, which came over with the Jaredites, was also a person that was introduced or was a very prominent part of Incan culture through a god known as the Viracocha. And the people who worshipped the Viracocha were called the Viracochas. Now, before I get to the final DNA evidence that has been introduced by L.A. Marzulli and his researchers, I'm just going to reaffirm some of the other, and we'll call it circumstantial evidence. This is all just circumstantial stuff because it's being proven and it does match certain things, but beyond that, we can't really say for sure, right? But we can say, well, there are a lot of interesting coincidences, and add to those interesting coincidences are the Viracochas of the Incas. You have Quetzalcoatl of the Aztecs, who also was a bearded god. And you also have Kukulkan of the Maya. Now, all of these descriptions of this god, the Viracocha and Kukulkan and Quetzalcoatl, they all talk about the serpent. Now, the serpent in ancient cultures represents eternal life because snakes shed their skin. They appear to continually perpetuate themselves. So, there is this aspect of their gods being associated with an eternal life. And the last thing I'm going to say is that when the Spanish landed, the Spanish landed in 1517 with Cortez onto the Central American peninsula. And the people there told, when the monks asked them where they came from, they all replied that they came from Europe. They came from the Middle East. And of course, that was not going to get passed back to the Catholic Church, because if these people came from the Middle East, they were technically Jews. And who was financing this operation? So that was hushed up. And the other thing that hasn't been spread around too much, but is pretty much common knowledge, is that the Aztecs mistook Cortez for a bearded white god. Okay? So, before we get to the DNA evidence, I just want to throw in those things and also add that the Hopi also have an interesting character in their religion who they call Pahani, which to them is the brother, right? So all of these accounts of a teacher that came, left off, he was an extraterrestrial, and then he left off into outer space, right? And these are all confirmed in the Book of Mormon, and now they're being confirmed by this DNA evidence that I'm going to show you right now. So it appears that these elongated skull people, who go by various names, have DNA that comes from either the Middle East or Europe, and then another subgroup also comes from the Middle East and could come from North Africa. So this goes against the land bridge theory of coming from Asia, and it really flies into the face of science. Now I'm going to explain this to Blake Cousins if he's listening, and I'm going to explain this to Dr. L.A. Marzulli, who is probably scared to death that somebody like me is going to take his research and associate it with the Book of Mormon. But the fact is that because of science, and it's basically like the fake media, there are some things that are just not allowed. And so anything that supports the Latter-day Saint scriptures like the Book of Mormon or the Doctrine and Covenants, of course, is not going to be allowed or even to be talked about. And if you were to discuss it in academic circles, you would quickly be asked to leave that academic circle. So this is Deceptions of the Ages. It's a really interesting development, and on my next video, if there's not something else that comes out that is as important as these FISA memos, I'm going to talk about another discovery that also supports the idea of a fabulous city that was once mentioned in the Book of Mormon, and I think it's been discovered. So we'll talk about that next time on Deceptions of the Ages News.